Story number 1. When you're pulling an 18-wheeler through the deep heart of the Midwest at 3 in the morning, a rest stop isn't just a place to park, it's a sanctuary. Or at least, that's what you tell yourself to keep the isolation from driving you crazy. It was a miserable Tuesday in late November, and a freezing, gray downpour had turned Interstate 80 into a slick black mirror. I was solo driving a high-priority, 70,000-pound dry van load of industrial printing press machinery, pushing through a brutal 12-hour shift. The exhaustion was settling deep into my bones, making my eyes heavy and my reflexes sluggish. When you're managing that much weight on a rain-slicked highway, even a micro-sleep can mean a fatal jackknife. I knew I couldn't risk another 20 miles to the next commercial travel plaza. I needed to pull over immediately, clear my head, and use the restroom before my focus crumbled completely. Up ahead, a fading, rust-stained blue sign emerged from the dark. State Rest Area, 1 mile. I flicked my turn signal and coasted down the long, unlit off-ramp. This wasn't one of those massive, brightly lit plazas with fast food joints and rows of idling rigs. It was an old, abandoned-looking state turnout from the 1970s, surrounded by dense, overgrown woods that pressed right up against the concrete parking lot. There wasn't a single other truck in sight, just one dilapidated, flat-roofed concrete restroom building sitting under a single, flickering sodium security light that cast an eerie, sickly orange glow across the empty asphalt. I rolled the massive rig into the long truck parking lane, set the air brakes with a loud, echoing hiss, and left the engine running to keep the cab's defroster going. Against the freezing rain, the silence outside was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy slap of my windshield wipers. I grabbed my flashlight and a small pocket knife from the dashboard, took a deep breath of the damp air, and opened the driver's side door. The freezing rain hit my face instantly, cutting through my jacket like needles. I jogged across the cracked concrete toward the public restroom building, the orange security light buzzing loudly overhead like a dying insect. The heavy iron door of the men's facility groaned on its rusted hinges as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was freezing, smelling heavily of damp concrete, old bleach, and stagnant water. A row of 3 flickering fluorescent tubes hummed a high-pitched, maddening tune against the yellowed cinder block walls. There were 3 stalls at the back of the room. The first 2 doors stood wide open, completely empty. But the third door, the large handicap stall at the very end, was shut tight. I walked over to the sinks, keeping my eyes on the reflection in the cracked mirror. I washed my hands under the freezing tap water, trying to ignore the deep, unsettling feeling of being watched. That's when I noticed something strange about the closed stall behind me. A dark, thick liquid was slowly seeping out from underneath the metal door, creeping across the gray concrete floor toward my boots. It wasn't water, it was thick, dark red, and pooling rapidly. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned around slowly. I stepped closer, aiming my flashlight beam at the bottom of the stall door. The red pool was fresh, steaming slightly in the cold air of the room. I raised the flashlight beam up to the metal latch of the door. The little plastic indicator wheel that usually said "occupied" had been violently gouged out, and someone had crudely scratched a single jagged message into the metal with a sharp object. "Do not look inside." Panic surged through me, cold and absolute. I should have turned and run right out the door, back to the safety of my lockable cab. But the rational part of my brain thought someone was in there bleeding out, a victim of a violent robbery or severe medical emergency. I stepped directly in front of the stall, my boots sticking slightly in the red pool. "Hey," I called out, my voice trembling in the hollow room. "Are you all right in there? Do you need help?" There was no answer, just the steady, slow drip, drip, drip of something heavy leaking onto the floor. I reached out a shaking hand and gently pushed against the metal door. The latch was broken. The door swung inward with a slow, agonizing creak, revealing the dark interior of the stall. The toilet bowl was completely smashed, shards of porcelain scattered everywhere in the red pool. But the toilet wasn't the source of the fluid. Sitting on the concrete floor, wedged into the tight corner behind the piping, was a person, or at least it had the shape of one. It was wearing a dirty, high-visibility trucker vest, but its body was twisted into an impossible, broken pretzel shape, its joints bent entirely backward. Its head was tilted completely upside down, staring at me from between its own knees. The face was completely smooth, no eyes, No nose, no eyebrows, just a blank, pale expanse of skin, except for the mouth. Its mouth was stretched open into a massive, jagged circle filled with rows of needle-thin yellow teeth. The creature let out a wet, rattling wheeze, and its long, jointed limbs snapped forward, launching its broken body out of the stall straight toward my throat with terrifying, unnatural speed. Survival instinct took over completely. I threw myself backward, my boots slipping in the red pool, and scrambled out of the restroom door, slamming the heavy iron frame behind me. I heard a massive bang as the creature crashed into the metal on the other side. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the pouring rain across the pitch-black parking lot, lunging for the chrome handle of my Peterbilt. I threw myself up into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it just as a long, pale, jointed arm slammed against my driver's side window, leaving a thick smear of red across the glass. I smashed the parking brake knob, slammed the transmission into gear, and stomped the gas pedal to the floor. The 70,000-pound rig roared, the massive dual tires spinning wildly on the wet concrete before catching traction. The truck launched forward, tearing down the unlit exit ramp and blasting back onto the empty, dark lanes of Interstate 80. Through my side mirror, in the flashing amber glow of my hazard lights, I watched the pale, distorted silhouette standing under the flickering orange sodium light of the rest stop. It didn't chase me this time. It just stood there, its upside-down head tilting slowly from side to side, watching my trailer disappear into the blinding rain. I drove 100 miles without stopping, finally pulling into a massive, crowded, brightly lit truck stop in Iowa. The state troopers inspected my truck, but they found nothing on the window except a greasy, unidentifiable residue. The rest stop was shut down by the state Department of Transportation. A week later, for emergency maintenance, and it remains fenced off to this day. I never pull into unlit state turnouts anymore, no matter how tired I am, because I know that under those flickering orange lights, some stalls aren't occupied by people. They're occupied by things that are waiting for you to open the door. Story number 2. When you're hauling freight across the Southwest, the desert plays tricks on your mind. The endless stretches of New Mexico highway can make the night feel completely permanent, like the sun is never going to come up again. It was mid-September, right around 2:15 a.m., and I was running a solo route, hauling 45,000 pounds of dry grocery goods headed for a distribution warehouse in Albuquerque. The heat of the day had vanished, replaced by a biting, high desert chill that fogged up the edges of my side mirrors. I had been driving for 7 hours straight without seeing another pair of headlights. The sheer monotony of the dark road was making my eyelids feel like lead weights. I knew the dangers of road hypnosis, that trance-like state where you're steering but your brain is completely asleep. If a stray deer or a stalled car appeared on the dark asphalt ahead, I wouldn't react in time. I needed a blast of cold air, a stretch, and a heavy dose of caffeine to survive the final stretch. I spotted a pair of low, fading floodlights in the distance, marking a small desert rest oasis. It wasn't a major truck stop, just a lonely loop of concrete cut out of the sagebrush, with a small picnic shelter and a vending machine alcove built into an adobe-style shack. I pulled the long Kenworth into the dusty turnout, the gravel crunching loudly under the massive dual tires. I brought the rig to a halt, set the air brakes with a sharp hiss, and stepped out into the crisp desert night air. The silence of the desert was vast and absolute. There were no other trucks, no cars, and no signs of life, just the lonely wind whistling through the rusted metal roof of the picnic shelter. The vending machine alcove at the edge of the lot was illuminated by a single, buzzing white fluorescent tube, casting a pale, clinical light onto the dusty ground. I walked across the empty lot, my flashlight beam cutting through the desert dust. I entered the small adobe alcove, looking for a soda machine to get something sugary to wake me up. There were 2 old scratched-up vending machines sitting side by side against the wall. One was completely dark and marked out of service, but the second machine was buzzing loudly, its internal lights casting a bright blue glow across the concrete floor. I pulled a crumpled $5 bill from my pocket and smoothed it out against my jeans, stepping up to the glass display panel. But as I looked through the glass at the rows of sodas and snacks, my hand froze. The slots inside the machine weren't filled with plastic bottles or bags of chips. Each row was loaded with strange, small jars filled with a clear, thick preservative liquid. and floating inside those jars were items that made my skin instantly crawl. I leaned closer, aiming my flashlight directly through the glass. In the top row, inside a glass jar labeled Slot A1, was a collection of human fingernails, jagged and stained with dirt. In the row below it, inside a larger container, was a thick braid of human hair, still attached to a small patch of dried leather skin. My breath hitched in my throat. I backed up a step, thinking this was some sick, twisted Halloween prank left by local teenagers. Then, my eyes drifted to the very bottom row of the machine. Floating inside a wide, heavy glass cylinder was a silver, engraved metal wristwatch. The glass face of the watch was cracked, but the engraving on the back was perfectly legible under my flashlight beam. Property of L. Miller, Freightliner Logistics. My heart stopped. Larry Miller was an owner-operator from my company who had vanished on this exact stretch of highway 3 weeks ago. His truck had been found abandoned at a nearby mile marker, completely empty. A cold sweat broke out across my neck. I needed to get back to my truck, lock the doors, and call the state police immediately. I turned around to bolt out of the alcove, but the automatic coin return mechanism on the machine suddenly cycled with a loud, mechanical clack. I stopped, slowly turning my head back toward the display. The digital price readout on the front of the machine, which had been blank before, was now flashing a rolling text message in glowing red letters. Thank you for your selection, Mark. Then a heavy, wet thud echoed from the bottom of the machine. Something had just dropped down into the plastic retrieval chute. I didn't want to look, but my eyes were pulled down to the plastic flap at the bottom of the machine. I slowly stepped forward, using the tip of my boot to nudge the flap open. Sitting inside the plastic bin was a fresh jar, the clear liquid inside still swirling. Floating in the center was a human finger, and on that finger was a gold wedding band identical to the one I wore on my own left hand. A shadow suddenly fell across the blue light of the machine. I looked up. Standing just outside the entrance of the alcove, blocking my path to the truck, was a figure. It was incredibly tall and skeletal, wearing a long, grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit. It had no face, just a smooth, hollow void beneath its canvas cap. But its arms were impossibly long, reaching all the way down past its knees. And its hands were massive. Heavy iron meat hooks welded directly into the bone of its wrists. It let out a metallic scraping sound from its chest, and with a sudden terrifying lurch, it lunged into the alcove, swinging one massive iron hook straight toward my head. I ducked instinctively, throwing my weight to the side. The massive iron hook slammed into the concrete wall right where my head had been, sending a shower of gray dust and sparks into the air. I scrambled out of the alcove on my hands and knees, tearing across the dusty parking lot toward my Kenworth. Behind me, I could hear a terrifying, rhythmic clank, 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 as the creature pursued me, its heavy iron hooks dragging across the asphalt with explosive speed. I reached the cab door, pulled myself up the chrome steps in one desperate motion, and slammed the door shut, locking it just as the tip of an iron hook ripped a deep, jagged gash through the fiberglass of my sleeper berth. I smashed the parking brakes, shoved the transmission into gear, and stomped the gas pedal with everything I had. The heavy semi roared, the massive dual tires throwing up a cloud of desert, dust and gravel as the rig tore out of the loop and back onto Route 50. Through my rearview mirror, I watched the tall, faceless figure standing in the middle of the highway under the pale fluorescent light of the oasis. It didn't run after me. It slowly raised one of its blood-stained iron hooks, pointing it directly at my truck, before stepping backward into the pitch-black shadows of the sagebrush. I didn't stop driving until I hit a major, crowded truck stop in Flagstaff at sunrise. The company investigators and the local sheriff found the deep gouges in my sleeper berth. But when they went back to inspect the Desert Rest Oasis, the adobe alcove was completely empty. The vending machines had been violently ripped from the wall, leaving nothing but severed wires and empty concrete. Larry Miller was never found. I don't drive the desert routes after midnight anymore, and I never use vending machines at isolated turnouts, because I know that out there in the dark void, some machines don't take money. They take inventory. Story number 3. When you're hauling an 18-wheeler through the deep, endless pine forests of northern Maine, the night isn't just dark, it's heavy. The trees press right up against the edge of the asphalt, creating a green tunnel that seems to swallow your high beams whole. It was early November, right around 3:30 a.m., and I was running a solo route hauling a high-value, 50,000-pound payload of specialized aerospace electronics components headed for a secure facility near Bangor. The temperature had dropped below freezing, turning the damp road surfaces into treacherous patches of invisible black ice. I had been behind the wheel for nearly 9 hours without a break, and the mental strain was starting to take its toll. My vision was blurring at the edges, and I was starting to see phantom shapes moving in the shadows of the tree line. In this line of work, pushing past your limits isn't brave, it's suicidal. If I lost control of 80,000 pounds of metal on a black ice curve, there wouldn't be enough left of me to bury. I needed to find a safe place to park, check my cargo tie-downs, and close my eyes for a 20-minute power nap before my luck ran out completely. Up ahead, my headlights caught the faded green sign of a small, state-maintained wilderness rest area. It wasn't an official truck stop, just a wide, horseshoe-shaped gravel loop cut directly into the dense pine forest, completely cut off from any cell towers or electricity. There were no lights, no buildings, and no signs of life, just a couple of frozen wooden picnic tables sitting under the dark canopy of the trees. It was the epitome of isolation. I rolled the long Freightliner into the back curve of the gravel loop, positioning the rig so I had a clear view of the exit path back to the highway. I set the parking brakes with a loud, pressurized hiss, cut the main headlights to conserve the battery, and let the engine idle so the heater could keep the cabin warm against the freezing northern night. The silence that settled outside the cab was instant and total. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes and letting the deep, familiar vibration of the diesel engine soothe my frayed nerves. The warmth of the heater was comforting, and within minutes, I was drifting on the edge of a deep sleep. That's when the truck's automated, rear-facing blind spot radar system suddenly beeped from the dashboard display. The radar system is designed to alert the driver if a vehicle or obstacle enters the blind spot along the passenger side of the trailer. I opened my eyes, looking at the small digital screen on my dashboard. The radar map showed a small, pulsing yellow dot positioned right at the rear tandem axles of my trailer. I watched it for a long minute, assuming it was just a stray dog or a low-hanging pine branch moving in the wind. But then the dot began to move slowly up the side of the trailer toward my cab. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight and stepped out onto the metal running board, keeping my body low in the shadow of the door. The freezing mountain air was sharp, smelling faintly of pine needle decay and frozen dirt. I stepped down onto the gravel, aiming the white flashlight beam down the long silver side of the trailer. The light cut through the dark forest shadows, illuminating the smooth aluminum panels and the heavy rubber tires. Everything looked perfectly clear. I walked slowly down the passenger side, my boots crunching softly in the frozen dirt. I checked underneath the trailer frame, thinking a hitchhiker might be trying to ride on the axle rails, but there was nothing there, just the cold steel of the brake drums. I reached the back of the trailer and turned around, satisfied that the radar system had just glitched in the freezing weather. But as I turned my flashlight beam back toward the front of my truck, my stomach instantly bottomed out. The automated blind spot radar light on the passenger side mirror wasn't yellow anymore. It was flashing a bright, aggressive crimson, indicating an object was currently within touching distance of the cab door. I stood frozen in the gravel 50 feet away, my flashlight beam trembling against the side of my own truck. I raised the beam slowly, tracing the silver lines of the cab up to the high fiberglass roof deflector. There was a dark, wet trail of mud and pine needles leading right up the chrome side steps of the passenger door. And sitting directly on top of my truck's roof air deflector was a large, dark shape. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were filled with wet cement. I slowly raised the flashlight beam higher, illuminating the roofline. Crouched on top of the cab was a human-like figure, but its proportions were entirely wrong. Its torso was impossibly long and segmented, like the body of a massive insect, and its limbs were thin, skeletal sticks wrapped in rough, wet animal pelts. It didn't have a human face. Its head was a raw, fleshless deer skull, complete with a set of jagged, asymmetric antlers. Its eyes were 2 burning points of pale white fire deep, within the dark sockets of the bone. As my flashlight beam hit its face, the creature let out a low, vibrating click that echoed through the pine trees. It raised one long skeletal arm, its fingers ending in 7-inch razor-sharp bone claws, and slammed them directly through the thick glass of my truck's sunroof, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Pure survival adrenaline flooded my system. I didn't care about the cargo or the truck. I just needed to get behind the wheel before that thing cleared the cab. I sprinted across the gravel lot, throwing myself up the driver's side steps and dove into the seat. The creature's long, skeletal claw was already reaching down through the broken sunroof, tearing the fabric of the headliner apart just inches from my face. I slammed my foot down on the clutch, ripped the shifter into gear, and stomped the accelerator to the floor. The Freightliner groaned, the massive rear duals clawing at the loose gravel before finding traction and launching the rig forward out of the turnout like a rocket. The sudden acceleration threw the creature off balance. Through my side mirror, I watched its long, insect-like body tumble off the roof of the cab, landing heavily in the gravel behind me. It didn't stop. It immediately rose onto its long, thin limbs and began sprinting after the truck down the center of the dark highway, its skeletal legs moving in a sickening rapid blur, easily keeping pace with my accelerating semi for 10 terrifying seconds before I finally hit top gear and pulled away into the dark. I didn't slow down until I hit a well-lit state police barracks 40 miles away. The troopers found the shattered sunroof, the torn headliner, and deep claw marks gouged into the aluminum roof of the cab. The wilderness turnout was searched by forest rangers the next day, but they found nothing but a trail of heavy, unidentifiable tracks that led deep into the impenetrable pine bogs. I surrendered my long-haul license that week. I work a local day route now, hauling short vans in southern New England, and I am always home before sunset. But every time my dashboard navigation screen alerts me to an object in my blind spot, my hands freeze on the wheel, because I know that out there in the deep woods, some blind spots aren't empty. They're just waiting for you to step out of the light. Please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. Thank you.